So once again, welcome. This is actually the last series that we have in place for this month. And my name is Vince Caraffey. I work for Cuyahoga County Board of Health. I chair our opiate task force. I do work with several of the individuals in the room and the two gentlemen on stage today. Before we get started, I do want to thank a couple people. I do want to thank the LEARNI ALVIN SIEGAL Lifelong Learning Program. This is the second year that they've actually had a series on substance abuse. And, you know, the substance abuse that we're dealing with today is more or less the opioid issue. I also want to thank Cheryl and her family. You know, this started probably as an idea over a cup of coffee 2 years ago. And I've mentioned several times in the previous sessions the importance of families that are willing to take a tragic issue in their lives and actually move forward and do a very, very good job of increasing awareness to something that's really impacting the community, not only Cuyahoga County, but you know, across the state, but also, you know, across the United States. As we've moved through the sessions, we've tried to tie some things together. You know, we started out focusing on issues of treatment and recovery. We moved to issues associated with special population, that primarily being women in recovery that are dealing with issues, and especially pregnant women. Last week, it was services oriented towards the connection between some of the collateral damage associated with substance abuse, human trafficking. You had the opportunity to hear from Bill Dennehan on some of the services that are available in the community and some of the things that we actually need to work on, enhancing existing treatment systems, opening up beds, and some of the challenges that we're facing financially, not only in Ohio, but across the United States. And then we had an individual here that talked about the human resources aspect and the change and some of the issues dealing with substance abuse in the workplace. I think wrapping all that together when we start talking about substance abuse is the value and the importance of those individuals who are in long-term recovery. Those individuals that have really, you know, making a positive impact on the communities they serve. And I think that's the thing that we don't hear enough of. We always are challenged with that idea of if it leads, or if it bleeds, it leads. And we don't hear about individuals that are in long-term recovery, that are helping other individuals collectively, not only across the county, you know, but across the state. The two individuals on the stage today, I would call them both friends. I enjoy working with both of them. You know, being at the Run for Recovery with Recovery Resources and seeing Aaron and taking the time to walk together and talk about some of the challenges that we face and some of the gaps that we have in our coalition and how do we close those gaps. Meeting with individuals like Bob and calling him on the phone and telling him that, hey, I'm interested in getting into clinical recovery. You know, what do you think about this? So I enjoy their passion, I enjoy their stories, and I think that's the message that really comes across. I shared with everyone over the past couple of sessions the value and the importance of storytelling, so it's just not numbers that we're looking at. So the best thing that I can tell you is I've had the opportunity to work with both of these individuals. I consider them friends. I know I can call them, and the beauty of these collaborative relationships is that I can call and I can get a response back. I think they trust my opinion, and I trust theirs. And I know that they both are very active in the community, not only telling their story, but also increasing awareness to something that, you know, people are still shy to talk about. You know, stigma still plays a huge role in preventing people from thinking openly on this. I had an opportunity today, before I was here, to teach a class at CSU with a bunch of new residents and a bunch of new physicians. And I actually put that picture of those two individuals in East Liverpool, you know, with the young child in the back seat whose face was covered. And it was interesting to hear the perspective of individuals that are in the medical community. And how some of them said, hey, this is a great way to increase awareness. Some of them are like, what are you talking about? And it's still interesting to see the divide in our country as it pertains to substance abuse and how we view that. So what we're going to end up doing is you're going to hear from these two individuals. I'm going to let them go ahead and introduce themselves. And we're going to start with Bob Garrity.
Thanks, Cheryl, for asking me. My name is Bob Garrity, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. That's that's the politically correct way to say it these days. But you name the substance, and I abused it. I started out as an alcoholic. My family had, I guess you would say, the gene for alcoholism or addiction, and this definitely is a family disease, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point in tonight's discussion. But my grandmother was an alcoholic, and My parents drank every day, and they never had any consequences, though, and that's something we'll talk about as we go through this about addiction, is typically understood as continued use despite negative consequences. So my parents never had negative consequences, and I saw their drinking as being fun, exotic, that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I had the genetic component, and then I had the family background of pharmacy in my life. My grandfather was a pharmacist and my father was a pharmacist. And then I became a pharmacist. So it was like the perfect storm to become a drug addict, alcoholic. And that's exactly what I did. I went through my drinking years started at 13 and smoking weed at 14 and doing every other substance under the sun. I had a brother 9 years older, a sister 7 years older. I was born in 59, so I grew up during the 60s and the 70s, and that was the years of, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and everything goes, and I wanted to be part of it, and I had siblings who were big enablers of that. And so I started to get in trouble at 19, and we were, owning family drugstores. We were affluent enough that my parents got me out of trouble. And so I continued to get into trouble because I thought I can get out of trouble easily. And so I went on to school, and I really didn't know what I was going to do in school, in college. And when I got into college, I started following the Grateful Dead. It was like everything in my life was centered around drugs and alcohol. It was like I was wearing blinders, and I just wanted to party. And I ended up following in my grandfather's and father's footsteps, going into pharmacy school. And as soon as I got out of pharmacy school, actually during pharmacy school, troubles started to mount again, and I would get out of them. I would have misdemeanor arrests for trespassing, for drug possession, and this was about the time that marijuana was starting to be decriminalized, at least in Wisconsin and Illinois, where I grew up. And I, would get out of trouble, and then I started to not get out of trouble, and things got serious, and I thought, okay, I need to get help. So I would go into treatment, and I would go through treatment. I'd get out of treatment, and I'd go back into my drugstore as a pharmacist, and I would do the same routine. I would have a drink about 2 months after I was finished with treatment, and I would get away with it. Even though I was supposed to be going to AA, and then, about a week later, I would have a case of beer. And a week after that, I would have a fifth of gin with that case. And then I'd start taking pills from the drugstore, and the whole thing snowballed again, and I would be back in treatment. So that was my MO for years. And one day, my father finally locked me out of the drugstore after 15 years of working for Garrity Drug, and I thought I need to get out of this profession, and that's when I moved to Cleveland, Ohio in 1996 and went to law school and became an attorney. And at the end of law school, I asked for a pharmacist license in Ohio, and I got a pharmacist license, and I got in trouble again after 4 years of being clean and sober. And lost everything again, got 5 more felony convictions. I had a total of 7 felony convictions because I had 2 in Illinois. And I lost my law license, lost my pharmacist license, went to prison, got out of prison, went back to school and got my master's in social work, which is what Vince was referring to earlier, and got my law license back. And so the pharmacy board said they didn't want to see me anymore. And I was like, I kind of understand, But I still get to go see the pharmacy board because I represent pharmacists who get busted for taking drugs. So I get to see them a couple times a year, and it's a much better feeling to be on the other end of the table, not be the defendant. So I do a lot of criminal defense work now, which is kind of cool because when I get a lot of court-appointed clients, and I meet them in the holding cell, they're wearing their orange uniform, And I can tell them, I know exactly where they're coming from, because I'm very open about my situation. I tell all my clients my background. I speak publicly a lot, as Vince mentioned, and I've spoken with Aaron before. I have nothing to hide, because if I start hiding stuff, this disease starts catching me. And I think that I can have that beer again on a weekend. And it leads me all the way back to the syringe full of heroin that I ended up using in the final stages. So I meet these kids in their orange uniforms in the holding cell, and I say, "You're a heroin addict?" They're like, "Yeah." And I say, "I'm a heroin addict too. I just happen to have 15 years clean and sober." And it takes them a second until they realize that their attorney is a heroin addict. But after it dawns on them that two good things happen from that. They know that I'm a good advocate for them, and they also realize that there's a way to dig themselves out of the hole that they're in. So it gives them some hope. So I'm also a drug counselor, and I do drug and alcohol assessments on the side, a little bit of counseling, but being an attorney at law, I'm also a counselor at law. So I find myself counseling all day long, whether it's about substance abuse or continually telling judges that my client is sick and they're not bad and that they need treatment and not jail. I can't tell you how many times a day I say that to a judge in this 5-county region. And most of the judges know my whole background. They know I went to prison. They know I've been to 8 treatments. They know I lost everything. So they know I know what I'm talking about. Some of them love to hear it. Some of them are tired because they get tired of having the defendant in front of them for the 4th, 5th, or 6th time on another charge or a probation violation, and their hands are tied, that they have to lock them up. And I'm saying, try treatment one more time, please, give it one more try. We don't know when they're going to get it. And so I think I've taken up my 10 minutes of introduction time, but that's my background, and so I can field a lot of questions. Thanks.
And what we're going to do, again, just like last time, we'll take questions at the end. It was just telling Aaron, I'm never late. I am never late. For some reason, it drives me crazy. That's like my own pet peeve. But I'll never forget last year, it was probably one of the worst storms that came through, and I had a meeting with Judge Sinnerberg. So I get down there, our meeting is at like 8 o'clock, and everything is just closed up and moving slow. But who comes through the back door? Bob. And he's like, "Do we have a meeting together?" And I'm like, "I'm here to meet Judge Sinnerberg." He's like, "Oh, we're not meeting." So, I mean, the tireless effort that goes into helping people, it's there. And I think some of the other things that Bob, and he didn't mention it today, but when you try to understand people that are dealing with the disease, Bob always uses this scenario where if you put a loaded gun and a syringe on a table, somebody that's dealing with the disease of heroin addiction, and you tell them, if you put that syringe in your arm, I'm going to shoot you. And the idea and the thought and the mind of that individual is maybe the gun will misfire. Maybe there's no bullets in it. Maybe I can get out of the room. The power and that lure of the drug, I think, is something that people don't understand. And I think that lack of understanding, it prevents people, in some cases, I think, from really moving forward. And we have 150 years of looking at addiction as a moral failure. That's hard, in a 10-year period or 6-year period that we've really been working together to get people to understand that change. And it's a challenge that we continually face. So our next speaker is Aaron Marks. I've worked with Aaron, like I said, hand in hand on a lot of different issues. We've partnered on a lot of panels together. And, Aaron's story is another story of success that I think more people need to hear. So, Aaron.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I'm glad to be here. I have a soft spot for speaking in Beechwood. I grew up in Beechwood, so always enjoy coming back. But I grew up here, and I too am in long-term recovery, and in a similar fashion, it was there wasn't really anything I didn't want to do. So it started innocently enough. I was actually probably the first couple of things I was introduced to, alcohol and marijuana. And it was, hey, I smoked this joint, it was amazing, or I had this drink, it was amazing, you should try it, it's fun. And, it was a friend who looked healthy and normal and like had no consequences and everything looked fine, versus, drug education at that point was, the egg in the frying pan, like this is your brain on drugs, and like pictures of like people like hiding under bridges. So like you see that and they say like this is what drugs do, and then you see your friend who has zero consequences, looking healthy, happy, having fun, and saying, hey, this is what drugs do. So who are you gonna listen to? So yeah, I mean, I started kind of experimenting or using, and right away, like it was abnormal. Right away, I was like very excessive with it, because I believe that I believe that I have some sort of physical kind of, substance abuse disorder, right? Alcoholism, addiction. I believe in that. So, when I take something, I want more of it all the time. And then, in high school, what happened was it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that's when kind of the pill boom started happening. There were some changes that happened with prescribing practices. Doctors were now encouraged to prescribe. Pain became a vital sign. Hospitals' reimbursements were affected by how painkillers were prescribed. So you had this huge influx of pills and this kind of change as a society of how we deal with pain. So, as a byproduct of that, you had pills everywhere, in every medicine cabinet. All your friends had them. It was everywhere. So when I was in high school, two things kind of happened right around the same time. One was, it was not abnormal to be at a party and someone say, hey, if you take this pill that I took from my parents' medicine cabinet and you drink 2 beers, it's going to make you feel like you drank 6 beers. Well, great, no brainer. And then I had my wisdom teeth pulled and I was prescribed ibuprofen, so Vicodin. And so all of a sudden, I have these pills and I have this kind of tendency to want more of whatever it is I take, and then add, this extremely physically and mentally addictive substance on top of my already kind of inherent nature to want to do more. And the results were, very bad. I became addicted very quickly to these pills. And right around that time was also when OxyContin started being prescribed, and somehow that ended up everywhere. A drug that really should be reserved specifically for end-of-life cancer or something like that. Really, really strong stuff was being overprescribed like crazy, and it was everywhere. And at that point, there were no addiction deterrents in it, so you could just crush it up and have a massive amount of opiate drugs. And here were the things that were not being talked about, that are sort of being talked about now, much more so than they were before. But nobody was talking about the connection between pharmaceutical drugs and heroin. Nobody. Nobody was saying, hey, this stuff is almost chemically identical to heroin. They're saying, hey, this is a painkiller, it's legal, it's prescribed, it's safe, no problem. So, again, as a 16-year-old kid, what are you thinking, right? You're going, this is something that's in a medicine cabinet, and nobody's talking about that it's going to cause withdrawals. Nobody's talking about, the things it's going to make you do, and like the loaded gun thing. I mean, it's like nobody's talking about that kind of obsession that it creates. So I didn't even understand what was happening to me while it was happening. And, I was basically, a heroin addict without using heroin at the time. I mean, I was taking these pills and I was completely like, just encapsulated by my addiction. And it progressed and progressed and progressed. And again, because I didn't have an understanding of what addiction was, and I didn't have any signs what to look for, and I didn't understand what was happening, I started kind of playing this game where it was like I'd get super addicted to the pills, and then I would use other pills to kind of essentially detox myself from those pills, and then I'd start just drinking, or I'd start just smoking weed, or I'd just start, doing some other drug, or do whatever it is. So I started this like kind of self-medicating kind of journey through pharmacology, and I ended up down in Cincinnati for school, and at that point it was becoming, again, even more and more common. The pills were everywhere. The dorms were completely flooded with them, and I would go through withdrawal if I didn't have them. And, for those of you who don't understand what that means, I mean, it was, essentially like within hours of my last dose, I would start to, develop almost like flu-like symptoms. So start, getting sweaty, anxious, start to have muscle aches, start to have like extreme nausea, and your whole mind becomes just completely focused on one thing. You need more of that pill, more of that drug to stop the feeling that is happening from getting worse. It's not, a lot of people talk about, like, who cares? They're having fun. They're choosing to do it. Like, screw them, let them die, or let them whatever. It's like, once that addiction piece takes over, it's no longer this thing that you want to do. It's something that you're obsessed with doing and you need to do even just to feel remotely normal. And so, I went to the guy who I was buying the pills from, and he was out, and he said, but, I have this, and you can have it for free, and try it. And he gave me heroin. And at that point, I speak enough, and I know some of you have heard me speak because I see your faces, but, what I like to say is, like, I understand, like, if I'm talking to kids or if I'm talking, well, pretty much anyone, like, I understand that most people would say that they would never do heroin, like, just never would do it. Because if I were sitting in the audience, and when I was sitting, in a high school or middle school room, and before that, probably all the way up until that exact moment, I knew I was never going to do heroin, 100%, zero, just not going to happen. But again, that obsession, that like just complete, utter disregard for everything other than not feeling the way you were feeling at that moment. It wasn't even a thought. Like, it was, give me that now. I was more concerned about how it would look. I was like, please just don't tell anybody. Don't tell anyone you gave me this stuff. And I took it, and you know what? It did exactly the same thing that the pills did. Nothing different, because it is almost the exact same thing. And I think that's something that's so important that people really need to understand is, we want to label one thing. Oh, that guy's a junkie, uses heroin. Oh, but that woman, she was prescribed that stuff, so it's okay, it's different. No. They are almost, you're the pharmacist, they're almost chemically identical. Heroin was created as a way to get people off of morphine, correct? So, they're all in the same family. So the difference was that it was cheaper, and it was actually easier to get. So all of a sudden, I was doing more. The tolerance started to build up, and the cheaper it was, the more you do. And next thing you know, like, I'm developing this incredible habit. And then, unfortunately, like, progression is real with addiction. So eventually, it was after I found out a friend of mine had died from a heroin overdose, and another friend of mine had checked himself into treatment. I found out that in the same call, and it really kind of spiraled me out. And for the next really 7 months, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And eventually I started using a needle, and, just progressively got worse and worse and worse until, I got sober. So I know we're going to talk more. It's hard to do 10 minutes, but, long story short, to put an end on it, it's, I had that friend who got sober. I learned about sobriety. I learned about, what treatment was. I learned about what recovery was. And I learned about what addiction was. You can't really even know that you want to get better until you know what you're looking for, right? I didn't understand what I was looking for. So after that, that kind of started the journey towards recovery, and that brought us here.
That's right. I do think it's interesting. Like I said, today after I did my talk to these residents, I had a doctor come up to me, and he's like, I think the problem that you're dealing with is that focus on methamphetamine, and we started putting everything behind the counter. That's why we've seen this increase in heroin use. And I'm like, no, you're talking about two different things, and tried to explain to them that connection between the pills and how they're structurally very, very similar to heroin. So that misconception, and this is for individuals that are physicians that are going to be have the prescribing power in the future to do this. Cheryl, do you? Okay. Does anybody have cards? I'll come by and collect them real quick for questions. Questions for Bob. Bob, do you go to AA or NA meetings, and do you have a sponsor?
I go to 4, okay, they're technically AA meetings, but one of them is at my sponsor's house. My sponsor's in AA, but he used to be a junkie, and he never had a whole lot of experience with alcohol. There are 3 other guys who go to that same meeting, and they're all in NA. So we always have this disagreement about which is better, NA or AA. It's really, it's just an informal joke of a disagreement because they're both 12-step based. NA started later than AA. And it's weird how when I meet normal earth people who don't drink or use, and they say, do you still have to go to those meetings? And I have to explain to them, it's almost like diabetes. You know, the diabetic still has to use insulin or metformin or glyburide. And this is my insulin, you know, going to meetings because I have such squirrely thoughts. This disease is constantly working in the back of my head saying that I can drink someday. I can shoot dope again someday. So I need to be reminded about how goofy I think, and these people at meetings remind me of that. And for years I had pushed people from AA away thinking they were all weirdos, and I kept them at arm's length and didn't let them get to know me. And it wasn't until I'd lost everything and, you know, was facing prison, and I finally said, okay, I'm going to tell these people everything about myself, every squirrely thought. And you know what? They had had exactly those same squirrely thoughts that I had. And so we bonded and we're best friends. And so it's my insulin. So.
Question, Aaron. What helped you the most when you were first getting sober?
Yeah, so when I first got sober, I too kind of came through in the 12-step world. And for me, it was a few things. It was willing to kind of listen to other people who knew how to get sober and had like a plan, whether it was treatment professionals or other people in sobriety, listening to what their suggestions were and following them like just whatever they said, I was like, okay, I'll do that. So, you know, hey, go to a ton of meetings, you know, surround yourself with sober people, you know, stay out of bars for at least a year, do all this stuff. It was like, okay. And then for me, you know, I was 20 when I got sober. So another important thing for me was to enjoy my life, right? And have fun. Like I didn't want to, just because I was getting sober didn't mean that I couldn't still have fun. And I think that really had a huge part to do with it. So I was running around with a bunch of young, sober people doing dumb, you know, young people things, but just doing them while staying sober. And it was really important. And then it kind of evolved into, you know, a thing that's kind of continued to drive me to stay sober and to you know, live a happy and productive life is, you know, trying to figure out ways to give back. So the more, as soon as I was able to, you know, the more I was able to kind of try to be an advocate and try to help and give back, whether it's helping, you know, an addict one-on-one or doing things like this or, you know, working with the different task forces and different things like that, that kind of purpose and you know, advocacy really helped me stay sober too.
Thanks, Aaron. Bob, this question's for you. Do you think going to prison helped your, man, I can't read that, situation?
You know, in my mind, when I stood in front of Judge Burt Griffin and he said, I'm sending you to prison, and I thought, oh man, you know, because I thought I was going to get probation one more time, and it was my third strike because I had 2 separate felonies in Illinois. And I thought, you know, that's not going to help me. And but I guess there's no way to rewrite history. I had already had, from the time I got arrested on January 31st of 2001 until I got sentenced to prison on August 29th, I was sober and clean and sober that entire time. because I just threw myself back into AA and meetings and my sponsor. But in hindsight, I can't say, that prison wasn't a factor. I would like to think it wasn't. I would love to think that I wouldn't have had to go and I would have been able to stay sober and clean without it, but it was a part of it. And there's one of the tenets of AA is that we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it, because my past is my greatest asset, really, whether it's in the courtroom with a defendant or at an AA meeting to a new sponsee, to tell them all the crap that I went through and to show them that I got better despite all of that, it carries a lot of weight, so.
The question is, I have my 3 children here, ages 14, 12 years old. What would you say to them that you wish someone would have said to you that may have had some meaning, that may have changed, I guess, your course or your direction?
So, disclaimer, I can't, I'm not an expert, so it's just opinion. So we have, I definitely know more than some, but I always like to, this is opinions. Okay. I am not naive. So when I talk to kids, I understand that me saying don't do drugs is not going to work. And it's almost unrealistic for me to expect for everyone to not do drugs or to not drink. It's difficult, especially when I'm talking about you could go your whole life, i.e. Prince, and not drink and do drugs and be prescribed something and become an addict that way. So I can't, it's not about, hey, teach your kids morally to be right or wrong. It can't be about that. To me, what I wish I knew and what I would suggest that people, begin doing and continue to do, those who are already doing it, is deliver very real information to your children, okay? These drugs are addictive. They shouldn't be taken for things that they shouldn't be taken for. If you are a person who tends to use more or start having cravings or doing these things when drinking and you see other people aren't, identify that and you might need help. And if you need help, as your parents, we will help you, because it's very, if you are too strict and push away, you risk isolating yourself from your children. It's not to say like, hey, it's cool, just drink, and as long as you're not an alcoholic, you can drink all you want. It's really, it's not an easy answer, is what I'm trying to say. It's like, everybody's different. Everybody responds differently to drugs, and alcohol. There has to be a very real lesson too. You can't just say, okay, I understand you're going to do drugs and it's okay fully, because your kids also need to understand that drugs can kill you one time, especially with all this heroin and the fentanyl and all this stuff. Like, you could try something once and die. And it's a very real thing. It's not a scare tactic. It's a very real thing. There are also things that people don't even really talk about. Like, I have a friend, he's been sober for 12 years. I was with him the night that it happened. He took an ecstasy pill and it was laced with something, and he's had permanent, side effects from it. Anxiety, he still has to go to doctors and do all this stuff. I mean, that was 15, 16 years ago, and he still carries that with him because you don't understand what you're taking. You don't understand what you're getting. So it's, be intelligent about what's happening, understand the what these drugs do to your body, understand that you really should not be trusting things that come from the street and you don't understand what you're doing. And just having real conversations. And again, it's not to say that didn't happen for me. I didn't have real conversations. It's just those conversations were not very prevalent at the time. I mean, people were, again, in my intro, people were not talking about the connection between a Percocet and heroin. And now we need to talk about that. We need to really talk about that. So that would be my suggestion.
That's, being open, honest. Don't drink to excess in front of your kids. Don't have friends over who drink to excess in front of your kids. Don't pop pills in front of your kids. be a good example and talk about it. I have a perfect case study. I have a 21-year-old son. My first two marriages were dissolved, just like my family business was dissolved. I learned in pharmacy school that alcohol was a solvent. And then I learned later it dissolves marriages, it dissolves jobs, it dissolves licenses. But anyway, the second marriage was the only, I had one son, and the marriage went quickly downhill. She tried to support me. She supported me through like 3 treatments. Finally, she ran away just like the first wife did, and got out of there. So she moved with my son to Seattle, Washington, and we were living in Illinois. And I went to law school at the same time they moved to Seattle. So I moved to Cleveland, and I thought that I would end up moving to Seattle at the end of law school, but I got sucked into the Cleveland vortex of AA and recovery and had my relapse and ended up staying here 20 years and not moving to Seattle. But my son would come and visit a couple times a year for 2 weeks at a time, and invariably I would take him to 2, maybe 3 AA meetings each week that he was here. So I thought by the age he hit 21, he would probably be on a therapist's couch saying all of his problems were related to going to those dang AA meetings. But anyway, he's grown up to be a great kid. We talk about everything. We talk about his drinking. He drinks on the weekends. He's a senior in college in California. And we talk about his drug use. He smokes weed. He's done ecstasy. He's done mushrooms. He showed me a picture of the peyote buttons that he bought. He has tried cocaine. We talk about all of this. And I am a cautionary tale to him. He knows all about the genetic component and what will happen to you if you do become addicted. So we talk every week, and I'm asking him, what's the party scene like this year at school? And we talk openly and honestly about it. The one, if he's addicted to anything, it's working out. He spends about 3 hours in the gym every day. So he's got 6-pack abs, and he's built like an Adonis. But that, in the back of my mind, I'm worried that if he injures himself in the gym someday, he's going to need some pain pills, and the next thing could be heroin. So, but the key thing is just talking about it, having an open relationship with your kids, and sharing everything, and just letting them know that you're concerned about them and that you'll be for them, be there for them if they need help.
I think that it's really important. I think I've mentioned to you at the first session that I have addiction in my family, but just recently, this past April, my son was a senior. And my wife came up, it was 11:30 at night, and she's like, Tony's lying to me. And I'm like, what's going on? And she's like, well, he said he was going out to the car, but I saw him put something in the mailbox. And I'm like, okay, so it's 11:30 at night, and if I wasn't involved in these type of events, I probably wouldn't have went there and confronted him. So we started talking, and I knew he was lying to me. Finally, he's like, well, I owed Victor money, which is his friend. And I'm like, money for what? He's like, well, I owed him Chipotle. And I'm like, you're lying. What's going on? And he's like, you don't understand, Dad. We went downstairs, and my wife came down, and he's like, well, I got a call from Uncle Tony, who's my brother. And I'm like, well, what, my brother was obviously using again. He's like, well, Uncle Tony wanted $150 from me. I'm like, go outside and get the money right now and go to bed. And about 1:30 in the morning, my brother pulls up. He goes to get something out. I open up the door, and I'm like, Tony. He's like, yeah. I'm like, get out of here now. So he drives away, a car follows behind him. And the next day I came home from work, and my wife's like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, call my son, Tony, downstairs. And I said, Tony, here's the thing you have to understand with addiction. I said, does it make any sense to you that your uncle, who's 42 years old, is calling you to borrow $150? He's like, no. And I said, well, when people are dealing with this illness, they're making judgment calls that aren't right. And he's like, well, what should I tell him? I said, when Uncle Tony texts you again, tell him you love him, tell him to call a sponsor, and he needs to live a life of sobriety, and that's it. And, my son asked me, he's like, how come you've never told me this before? And I said, how do you think I feel telling my son that my 2 brothers are, involved with this and dealing with issues of addiction? So I think openly talking about it is very important, and sometimes it can be very hard, And I haven't talked to my brother Tony. I I don't know when I will, to be honest with you. But, the tragedy of this is, my thinking was, and people told me is, what happens if something happened between the gentleman that was behind him and my brother, if he owed that gentleman money? What happens if my son went out there? So some scary stuff, but I think openly talking about it's hard, and it's a difficult situation. I think this probably could be for both of you. You called addiction a disease. How do you avoid getting this disease? Whew. That's the question of the day,
There's that whole genetic component I mentioned, and then you'll hear studies saying there is no genetic component. It's such a, you mentioned earlier, 150 years of believing that it's a moral failing. So in 1950, the American Medical Association, I think it was 1952, they came out and they said, okay, alcoholism is a disease. And I think they had watched AA grow up from 1935 through 1952 and saw all these people flocking to AA. And so they sort of had some case studies, and they saw that they met certain criteria. And therefore, the psychologists and psychiatrists got together and started a thing called the DSM. Well, they had number 1, and they're up to number 5 now, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders. So addiction and alcoholism, we'll call it now a substance use disorder, it doesn't matter what the substance is a mental health disorder. And here's the same guy I learned that whole gun and syringe on the table thing. He said the disease is in the brain. It's the same as diabetes. The organ that's affected is the pancreas, and you're not producing insulin, and the symptoms are excessive urination, excessive thirst. If you break a leg, you don't think of a leg or a bone as being an organ, but a bone is an organ. The defect in the organ, the leg, is the broken bone, and the symptoms are you can't walk. So with the brain, it's neurotransmitters that are defective, or the receptor sites for the neurotransmitters. And the weird thing about the brain, it's the unknown frontier, the final frontier. We can't take a brain out and look at it and work on it while it's still connected to the body. We have magnetic resonance imaging now, fMRI, which you can watch the brain's functions with it. It's one of those net things that goes over the head, and you can watch the brain function. But you still can't really tell where serotonin's working, where norepinephrine's working, where all the opiate receptors are working. So those are the things that, when you talk about heroin, it's the opiate receptors. When you talk about dopamine, that's pretty much every other drug. They all affect your dopamine levels. Serotonin is thrown in there a little bit, and norepinephrine. We all have heard about serotonin because of Prozac and all the other antidepressants. They're selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. I know I'm throwing a lot at you here. But anyway, so we have experts in the field say it's a disease, and many believe there's a genetic component. And the bottom line is, I don't think I would have done all the crazy stuff. I think if I'd gone to treatment one time and realized that my pharmacist license and my marriage was all on the line, I would have stopped right then. But I continued to do that crazy stuff and lost all that. So I believe that there is a mental health disorder going on right here.
This question's for everyone. What role can families play? To both of you guys. Aaron, you want to start?
Yeah. My dad's here. He shows up a lot. Show up when your kids are doing panel discussions. No. Again, it's kind of similar to what we were talking about before. I always tell families, it's a tough job, right? Because you want to, especially when you have younger kids, like you want to be a good role model or be a parent and kind of, make sure that you want to be the parent and what your idea of the parent is, or you want to be a brother or a sister or a son or a daughter, whatever it is. I mean, it affects everybody. I just want to reiterate what I was saying before. It's so important when the person who is suffering from addiction is ready for help. They need to know that person is there to help them, right? When I was ready for help, I knew that I could call my parents and they would help me. I didn't have to like go figure it out on my own, and I'm extremely grateful and fortunate to have had that. So when I do talk to families, I say the same thing. You always want to be supportive. You have to draw the line. You don't want to enable people, because if, you know, like Vince's story, you know, remember, the brain of an addict has been hijacked. That stuff that you were talking about, it's been hijacked, right? And going back to what I said during my intro, it's like the only thing that person can think of is how to not feel that way. And if that means taking advantage of those around them, we will take advantage of those around them. And that's usually the family. So you can't just leave yourself open to that and say, oh, here's, you know, as much money as you want, or here's a key to my house so you can take whatever you want whenever you want. I mean, there's lines to be drawn, but I think you said it perfectly. You know, what do I tell Uncle Tony? Tell him, hey, I want you to get help, you know, live a life of sobriety. I love you. I mean, that's it. It's like, you know, I would say the same thing to anyone. Like, if I had friends or family in my life today who were going through addiction, I'd say, I will do anything for you, as long as I believe that it's going to help you get sober. So I'm not going to give you money. I'm not going to, you know, let you crash at my house and steal all my stuff, like whatever. You know, if you need me to drive you to treatment, if you need me to take you to doctor's appointment, if you need me to make phone calls to treatment centers for you, if you need me to drive you to meetings, if you need me, whatever you need me to do that's going to help you get better, I'll help you get better. But so it's you know, finding that balance.
And just getting educated about the disease, you know, one of the best things in treatment is family group, where family members come for 1 or 2 sessions, or some treatment centers it's a week long, and you go to group every day, and you learn about all the BS your loved one who's sitting there in treatment has been pulling on you all these years, and you start with a clean slate. And they often, a lot of the family groups I went to, they had the entire family stand up and they gave them a rope, and they all leaned out on the rope. And then if one person, the addict, leaves, lets go of that rope, it affects the tension in the whole family. So if that person goes to treatment, they come home, you're used to having an addict in the family, and you're used to lying for that loved one, you're used to enabling them, and now they come back and they're going to AA meetings all the time. It's sent you into a different quandary. Your whole life changes. So that's one aspect of it, when I talk about it being a family disease that I mentioned earlier. Another thing, if you've got an active addict in your family, especially if it's heroin, or really any substance, if you have a real sullen kid who's sitting at the dinner table, and then they go to the bathroom and they're gone to the bathroom for 5 or 10 minutes, and they come back to the dinner table and they're all happy and talkative, something just happened in the bathroom, you know? Behavior has meaning. You know, their behavior has meaning. Something is going on. Look for baggies, corners of baggies, you know, plastic Ziploc bag. A lot of dope is sold in corners of baggies. If you see those laying around. Syringes, typically BD syringes, and a lot of the generics have these orange tips. If you see these orange plastic tips that were protecting the syringe, see those laying around.
Part of that too is accepting the very real situation that we're in right now, which is, you know, people are dying. A lot of people are dying. And so as a family member, you might be in denial, right? Like, that's not going to happen, not to my family. But if you even suspect it, you should have naloxone in your home. You know, it's the opiate reversal. I've been sober for 12 years. I carry it with me. Like, I don't care. I could be walking down the street and see somebody overdosing. Like, I want to be able to help if I can. You can get these kits at the Board of Health. You can get them at Metro Hospital. They're at CVS and Rite Aid, and you can get them. So, again, it's not guaranteed that you're going to be there if somebody overdoses, and it's, you know, and if they're by themselves, there's nothing that anybody can do about that, and it's not by any means the family's responsibility, but, you know, this is the world we live in right now, unfortunately, and, you know, we have to kind of take that, like, really, like, you know, very kind of like public health approach. Yeah. I mean, really, harm reduction. right? We have to take a harm reduction approach and say, okay, you know, Cuyahoga County might lose 500 people this year. You know, I mean, we're going to double what we did last year. Like, these are very real things that, like, we have to acknowledge. And that includes, you know, having this kit in your house like you would Band-Aids. Like, why not? It's harmless. It's very inexpensive or free. Just, you know, if there's even a remote chance that anyone in your family is going to be using opiate drugs, have that stuff in your house. Yeah. Yeah. And part of the work that we've done, I mean, the task force groups have made it so that it's available, right? I mean, like, that's the kind of stuff that's happening right now is like, you know, a couple of years ago, if your family member was using heroin or pills and you were worried about them overdosing, you could not go and get a naloxone kit because the only person who could get it would be somebody who was an addict themselves. Well, we changed the laws in Ohio to make it so that not only are more first responders carrying it and police officers and firefighters and all these different people, but that you can walk into a CVS and go get it, or you can go to the Board of Health and get it. These are the kind of things, you know, I know one of the things you want us to talk about were the positive things that are happening. It's like, these things are, as much as they're upsetting and we wish we didn't live in that world, like, there are things that are changing and happening, and part of that is that, you know, having access and looking at it as a public health issue and saying, hey, these people deserve to be saved. Let's make sure that the thing that can save them is easily accessible.
One of the great,
Yeah.
everyone should have it. One of the great visible statistics is that every day in the U.S., 100 people die of a heroin or pill overdose. That's one airplane being shot down to the sky every day. You know, if that was actually happening, we'd be up in arms that an airplane was being shot down. But we're losing an airplane full of people every day. But it's still crazy.
Questions for you. What exactly are negative consequences? I guess maybe as it relates to the disease.
Getting arrested for drug possession, getting kicked off your high school football team for drug use, breaking up, your girlfriend breaking up with you or boyfriend breaking up with you because of your drug use, your family kicking you out of the house, your family taking away your right to drive the car, the family car. Anything that affects you negatively is a negative consequence.
Aaron, this question's for you. Did you have to hit rock bottom to want to get into recovery? And what prompted you to take action? I think you mentioned that in your opening, but if...
So, so when my friend died from a heroin overdose, it was definitely like a kind of one of those like earth-shattering experiences. And amazingly, because addiction is so confusing and, you know, doesn't make any sense and there's very little logic in it, it wasn't like that moment I was like, oh my God, I have to get sober. I did the exact opposite. Like, my brain was just like, what? Like, I like popped a handful of pills and drove to South Carolina and like drank from a keg for 3 days instead of go to the funeral. Like, I mean, I was just like, I can't deal with this. So kind of, you know, some of you have, you know, there's some program people around and family program stuff who have heard me speak. So you know, like, I definitely believe in the idea of a bottom. I don't think that it necessarily has to happen for everyone to get better. Some people find other ways to get better. For me, I was just very fortunate to have this kind of like mental picture of a bottom that at least is what I hold up as my bottom. And it was when I finally was ready to get better. I had already made the decision that I was going to go to treatment, and I had to take a final in school, even though I was pretty much a college dropout at that point, but I was still like, I needed to take this final. And I went there and I took the final. I had been using heroin all morning. I took the final and my car was all packed up with stuff. I was going to meet my parents, and I got back down to where I parked my car to take the final, and it had been towed. And I was standing in this empty like parking spot, and it was like pouring rain, and I just started like crying in the rain. Like, it was very like out of a movie, you know. But it was good because like I remember that. I'm like, oh my god, like I think about that, like that just like complete lonely, isolated, just terrible place. And I'm just, you know, I never want to go back there, you know. I never want to experience that feeling again.
This question is also for you, Aaron. Can you talk about your experience with peer pressure and using? You mentioned some of that earlier also.
Yeah. It's funny because, so first of all, guilty. Like, I'm the worst. I was the worst for peer pressure, and I still am, but in like a totally different way. Like, I'm like, come on, let's go to dinner. Let's go. You know, like, but, I was so bad. Like, my friends who have like not real drug problems, but like drink a little bit too much. And so they continuously like put the blame on me. They're like, oh, just because you're sober doesn't mean this isn't your fault, when they're like drinking in front of me. So yeah, peer pressure is very real. And it's weird because it manifests itself in a few different ways, right? So like a lot of times, like when I was peer pressuring people or people were peer pressuring me, it was because of like a real joyous, like, oh my God, this is amazing. I want everybody to feel what I'm feeling, right? And a lot of times that's how peer pressure starts. And then it definitely converts into what I was talking about, how I got introduced to heroin, right? That guy who introduced me to heroin, he didn't introduce me to heroin because it was so much fun and he loved it so much. He introduced me to heroin so that he could sell more heroin, and I would get addicted to it, so that he would be able to pinch off the bags that he was getting and help support his habit. And so eventually, between pills and heroin and whatever, that became one of the reasons why I was peer pressuring people into taking pills and heroin, because it was like, I can't like afford to do this stuff, and I need more people to do it so we could buy more in bulk. I mean, you're not thinking specifically like that, but you're acting like that. You're like, if we had 10 people buying heroin right now, we would be able to get so much more. And so you start trying to get people addicted to heroin. It sucks, and I like hate to even admit it. It's like, it's very depressing, but it's very true. Again, that part of your brain gets hijacked, and it's like, that could be like the moral of the whole story, is like the addict brain will do incredible things to maintain where it is, right? And it doesn't matter. If that means stealing from your grandma, it means stealing from your grandma. If it means literally getting another person addicted to heroin, it means getting another person addicted to heroin. And that's why, like, I know it's controversial, but I get torn on these, like, you know, like murder charges for people who supply heroin. Again, there's a difference between like a drug smuggler bringing stuff in from Mexico, and then like if you and I are getting high together and I brought you heroin, because I know why I'm bringing you heroin, because I'm addicted to heroin and I need more, and you are too, and we're gonna, you know, right. I mean, that's how it works. Exactly. It's like, nobody's thinking about anybody else's well-being. They're thinking about how to not go through withdrawal. So like peer pressure takes a very weird, dark turn when you get into like opiate drug addiction, but it's similar.
This question I think has been asked several times earlier, but different panelists up here. Do you feel Narcan is helpful for an addicted individual, and do most individuals, or I imagine they probably say, relapse afterwards?
I think it's amazing stuff. I think it should be on the wall next to every AED defibrillator, because it's so safe and it has saved so many lives. The stuff is unbelievable. And a newborn baby could take that substance, swallow an entire vial of that, and have no effect whatsoever. It'd be like water to them. That's how safe this stuff is. I don't think, you know, here's the weird thing. When you use Narcan on somebody, you just harsh their mellow, because they don't know they're about to die. They are in euphoria at that moment in time. They're in heaven. Not literally yet, but they may be very close, but they're thinking, man, I feel really good right now. And then when you administer the Narcan, boom, you reverse all the opiates at the receptor site right off, and they wake up and they are cranky as heck. and they're irritable, and you just ruin their high. So I think once you need to get people into treatment. There should be a law that if Narcan's used, they are referred directly to treatment so they can learn more about it. I'm sure some people are going to go back out and use again, and they'll probably go to that same dealer who sold them the heroin that contained fentanyl or carfentanil and think, I'm going to use a little less. Because that's when I was shooting dope and we heard somebody died, and this was before the fentanyl craze, we went to that drug dealer and we bought dope from that guy because we knew it was good stuff. But in our mind, well, we'll just use a little less than what we thought that person who died used, even though we had no idea how much they did use. But in our mind, we were smarter than the other guy. So I'm sure there are going to be some people who continue to use, but I think enough people, it's changed their life for the better, and that they've, finally gotten treatment.
Yeah, and I know this is a debate that happens sometimes, like, are we enabling people to whatever? And we could go down that road, and a lot of people who have studied this stuff have gone down that road, and they've done the research and shown that it doesn't actually increase the amount of times people will use. It doesn't have that effect that people like, kind of like that reaction like you think it would, because whether they have that or not, they're going to use and not use, like that stuff doesn't really have an impact on it. Like somebody's going to use again and again and again and again, they're going to use again and again. But I like to push all that stuff out of the way and say, I absolutely do not care. When we're talking about saving somebody's life, there should be zero conversation, period. Like, oh, but I don't care. Let them use 1,000 times. Let them use 1,000 times. I do not care. Save their life. We would never have this conversation about diabetes. Never. Imagine if we sat up here and we're like, and I talk about this all the time too. That person drank a 2 liter of Coke and they went into a diabetic coma. Screw them. Let them die. Do not give that person insulin. Do not take them to the hospital. They do not deserve to live. Are you kidding me? We would never in a million years have that. Imagine if we said, we're going to get rid of insulin today because type 2 diabetes is just getting out of control. We're just going to get rid of insulin. We're going to get rid of it. You can't have it. You're not allowed to have it. No, we would never have that conversation. Never. So to me, I just like, because I've gone through it. We had these conversations.
So, use the same example.
Yeah, I mean, because when we were trying to get Good Samaritan passed, when we were trying to get, naloxone bills passed, when all these things were being talked about in Columbus, there were a lot of people who came up and said, well, why are we going to save somebody if they're just going to use again? And I answer that first part of why are we going to save somebody? Like, isn't that because it's somebody's kid, it's somebody's brother, sister, father, mother, friend, coworker. What do you mean? Why are we going to save somebody? I don't care. Like, I hate to sound so harsh, but I have no room left for it. I'm just like we're talking about human lives, like people.
And the good thing about saving somebody is they can turn out like the two of you and give back.
That's right.
That's right, man.
I pay a lot in taxes too. I pay a lot in taxes. I got a good job. I got a nice house. I pay a lot. I'm a contributor to society.
This question's for you. Why did you choose heroin, and what was your journey to get there? In your generation, it was said anything but heroin. Is that true?
Well, the heroin back in my generation, 60s and 70s, everybody knows Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones. He was one of my idols, and he was a heroin addict, and I thought, I want to be like Keith Richards. But the heroin back then was like 3 or 4% potency because it was so stepped on. Now we're at 25 to 35%, and then you throw fentanyl and carfentanil, and it's just off the charts. Mine, again, was access to pain pills. Growing up in a drugstore, I tried everything. And, I would party late into the night, whether it was cocaine, alcohol, combination thereof, any other substance. I'd wake up in the morning, and after several mornings of doing that, several weeks on end, I realized that, Percocet works really good for a hangover. So I would get in the habit of setting 2 Percocet on my bedside, and I would the alarm would ring, I would wake up, I would take those 2 Percocets, I'd go back to sleep. A half an hour later, boom, man, my eyes open, I was ready to roll. Because opiates have the opposite effect on addicts as they do normal people. You earth people, it makes you drowsy. You know, to us addicts, it gives us energy. And so then I would go to the drugstore and I'd take some potassium chloride to replace the salts that I had lost from peeing out all that alcohol. I would take some Dexedrine or some Adderall. Then in the evening and throughout the day, I would take Vicodin. And then I would take Halcyon, which I don't even know if they make that anymore. It's a benzodiazepine in the Xanax class. Or I'd take a handful of Xanax just to go to sleep. And I would just ride this roller coaster, and it was just crazy. But opiates became the one true love. And here's a little more science for you. I mentioned dopamine. All the other alcohol, methamphetamine, cocaine, everything has to work presynaptically. It has to activate dopamine to give you the high. Opiates go right to the mu opioid receptor, so they don't have to activate anything else. So it's like the perfect high. It is the ultimate feeling. It's what I've heard the description, there's kids here, so we won't say it. Anyway, it's the best feeling that I had ever had, was taking pills and then shooting heroin. And it's the best feeling until you have that feeling taken away and you are scrounging around for that last pill, that last bag of heroin. You have to beg the dealer, you have to, steal something, and it's the worst feeling in the world. The flu symptoms take over, the diarrhea, runny nose, irritability, the sweating, and it's just the worst feeling in the world until it's, until you get some more.
Probably goes to Bob. Just recently, Dr. Jerry came up here and we were talking about medicated assisted treatment. I don't know if you encountered this yet, but what are your thoughts about Vivitrol? I don't know if any of your clients that you represent have that. I know that the jail's currently working on some things.
Yeah,
Dr.
I've
Tallman.
got clients on it now. I think it's wonderful. It's one more tool in the tool chest. Vivitrol is an injectable form. Naloxone, the nasal spray to reverse the opioid overdose, is the liquid cousin of Vivitrol. Vivitrol is naltrexone, and it also comes in a tablet too, but I'm not going to get into that. But it's an injectable, it's subcutaneous or under the skin, and it lasts for 30 days. So they give it to people who are leaving treatment to make sure that they have 30 more days of clean time after they leave detox. They give it to people leaving jails. They have a great program set up in Summit County. I have clients down there who use it. Cuyahoga County has the Vivitrol available, but they didn't have anybody to administer it. It's crazy that they even couldn't figure that out. But they're trying to figure it out. So, because when you leave treatment, your tolerance is really low. When you leave jail, your tolerance is really low. So you need that 30-day window of time to get into treatment, to start going to meetings, because if you shoot the dope that's out there now with low tolerance, you're probably going to be gone. So, yeah, I love Vivitrol. I think it's a great addition.
And along those same lines, what about Suboxone?
I love Suboxone too. Sure, people will eat a ton of the films. It used to be a tablet, now it's this film. And I think you can still get generic tablets. And they claim people are taking enough of them to get high. Well, you never get as high as you would if you were taking a pill of oxycodone or a Percocet. It just isn't the same.
It's like the least abused opiate drug out there because it's a partial opiate antagonist. First of all, yeah. So
it's great.
Yeah, it's very good. It's not for everybody, but and there are objections in the recovery community, and there are obstacles that hopefully will be overcome shortly. But I mean, the data shows that these medically assisted treatment methods are more effective than traditional. And again, if we're looking at it from a harm reduction standpoint, we should be doing whatever we can to dig ourselves out of the current hole that we're in, and then, you know, you can continuously like look at long-term options. But I mean, Dr. Jerry, you know, will say he's got patients who have been on Suboxone for 7 years and have families and jobs and are, you know, living great lives and totally, you know, normal. So if that's, it's, again, I think we both really like the diabetes method. I always use diabetes. Some people have, you know, diabetes to a certain level and they can regulate it with diet and exercise and maybe some other life changes and things like that. And some people, it's, you know, developed to a certain level where it requires insulin or some sort of other medication. Typically, you still need to factor in diet and exercise. So that's the way I look at Suboxone. Suboxone on its own is really not going to be effective, but Suboxone coupled with, you know, intensive outpatient therapy or 12-step work or, you know, whatever it is that helps, you know, with the kind of behavioral and mental aspect of addiction, then it's extremely effective.
That was the last question. Once again, everyone, I think that the message I really want to get across is that, you know, recovery is achievable. There's different things going on in Ohio. Recovery is beautiful. I think the message that comes across, unfortunately, is you just see those pictures that cause more of a stir than pictures of individuals like this up on stage. I think the Plain Dealer was a couple of years ago. I think, Bob, you were in the series. They actually did a week-long series on individuals that were in long-term recovery, that were successful. And it goes back to some of that messaging that we see. There's not enough on the positive aspects of what's going on, that grassroots level approach to care, things like our harm reduction, needle exchange, naloxone, and really looking to get people into treatment. So if you could give these two gentlemen a round of applause, I'd greatly appreciate it.
We're not a glum lot. You know, we laugh a lot up here. That's one of the things, if you know somebody who is afraid to go into treatment because it's going to be the end of their life because they think there'll be a wet blanket, a veil of tears, well, it isn't that way. I have had more fun in recovery than I ever had when I was using. I always knew when I was coming through treatment, when I would have a belly laugh, I knew I had finally turned the corner because I never had a belly laugh when I was using drugs. So it's a lot of fun, recovery.
Once again, Cheryl, thank you to you and your family. I greatly appreciate the opportunity. Everybody give a round of applause. And in addition, you know, I wanted to thank everybody that, you know, came to each session over the past month. I know there's, you know, time is precious for people, but this is an issue that collectively we need as much help out in the community, whether it's passing along positive messages, whether it's increasing awareness to some of the dangers and those misconceptions of not my kid, not my community. So I thank all of you for coming and attending also. So have a good evening, have a good day. Stay dry, folks. And
How great the series was. Next year, there'll be